Hello, this is Pixel, and today I'd like to talk about a game I've been playing called Undying. This game is an action-adventure zombie apocalypse game, but it has a little bit of a different twist on it. While a lot of the core elements of this game, the combat, the exploration, the survivability mechanics where you're crafting things, those are all going to feel very familiar, but there are some core gameplay elements here that are very standout and very different. Particularly among those is the dynamic between the mother character, which you play as, who's named Anling, and her child Cody, who tags along as you play through the game. This ends up being quite an interesting dynamic because Cody ends up to not just be a liability, not just someone who you have to have tag along and causes problems around the way, but he can also help. He, in the very beginning of the game, can be used as a pack mule, where you can add additional items to your inventory by making him hold them. But as you progress through the game, he is watching and learning everything that Anling does, so eventually he can start taking over those responsibilities and begin crafting himself and speeding up your processes and even helping in combat. There is a catch to all this, though, and that catch gets revealed in the opening cinematic of the game. Anling and Cody have been living in the subway, and they're about to be moved when they're attacked by zombies, and a zombie bites Anling. So that casts a shadow over this entire game, that throughout the process of you trying to find help, really what you're trying to do is save Cody. You need to find someone to take care of him and teach him to take care of himself as this game proceeds, or he's going to die. At the start of the game, too, Cody is rather helpless. He can't engage in combat. He can barely do anything at all to help you aside from just hold your items. In fact, when the zombies attack, you might want to actually have him hide so the zombies don't attack him, because if he dies, it's game over. Additionally, and one of the touches that I just really loved about this game is Cody needs to eat and drink, much like your primary character Anling also needs to eat and drink and rest. But for Cody, you can't see his food meters and his water meters. Instead, you have to periodically engage with him and talk to him, and he'll tell you when he's hungry and thirsty through that conversation. This greatly reinforces that bond, that dynamic between mother and son, and makes the player feel more like the surrogate of Cody. And I think it really reaffirms to me that the developers know what they're creating and they know the direction that they're heading in, and it makes me optimistic that this is going to turn into a really great game. That being said, though, I think some of the core gameplay mechanics, and not necessarily the thematic mechanics, are what really needs work in this game, particularly around the combat. One of the criticisms I had is that I think that the zombies overall are just far too easy to avoid. If you don't want to engage with them at all, you can just run around in circles, and as long as you have enough energy, the zombies can't even attack you. I could round up about 8 or 9 of them, and they'll never hit me once. Also, the combat is very lackluster at this point. It's pretty much just playing a game of punch face where you hit them a couple times, they might hit you, or you might get into like a place where you have to button mash to get the zombie off you. Overall, it felt really bland, and I think that the developers need to reconsider what they're doing with the combat to make it not feel so much like a chore. Ideally, they'd steer more into this stewardship idea, this idea that you are responsible for Cody as Cody's mother, and use that bond, use that relationship, use that stewardship, but also use Cody as a tool in the combat. Not just to use weapons, but perhaps to set traps or act as bait, things like that. Bring utility to the relationship. And I think that'll make the combat more interesting, but I also think it'll tie back into the thematic elements of this game that they're shooting for. Beyond that, just some simple combat changes could help spice up that particular facet of the game. Perhaps some various moves, put a heavy and light attack in, or a wind-up mechanic or a timing mechanic when you're hitting, something maybe to conserve ammo, something along those lines. Those would really go far to help the player more engage with what they're doing and not make combat feel so mindless. One of the elements, though, that they have gotten fairly right from what I can tell in this early build is the crafting overall. The world presence is really big. There's a lot of places to explore. You find a lot of elements in that world. And then there's a lot of little crafting stations that you find that you have to upgrade and that you have to repair in order to make items to help your survivability. This overall has been implemented fairly well. I do think there needs to be a little bit of smoothing out. For instance, I found myself often needing to rest and not having a bed anywhere nearby, but I think those are very small changes that can be added to the world to help flesh out the gameplay experience. Overall, though, I think that the world presence and the whole crafting it's really well implemented. It feels pretty seamless and it made for a pretty good experience overall. The story is also presented in a fairly interesting way. You're following along as you're investigating where exactly Cody's father has gone, if he's died or if he's survived, but also you're tracking other family members in trying to get help, particularly for Cody as Anling realizes that the zombie bite Anling suffered in the very beginning of the game will most likely take her life. This does put a low level of urgency, almost a mechanic, into the player that facilitates them progressing through the game. The game does measure itself in days, and you do need to sleep, and days pass, and you can see that in the user interface. But from what I can tell so far, there isn't a set amount of days before Anling dies. That seems to be kind of open-ended, as she just gets to survive until you finish the game, or maybe she'll be cured by the end of the game. However, having the story use that mechanic, it ties nicely in with all of the story and the mechanics and the themes, and overall that is really what's got me walking away from this game optimistic. But there's a lot of questions here. There's a lot of speculation here, and that's because this is a game that's in alpha. If they were to release what this game is right now, and there was just a lot more of the game as it is right now, then I wouldn't be thrilled about the overall experience. There's a ton of small user interface things that need to be worked out. There's a lot of controls that popped up that showed me the wrong control, but these are the types of bugs that you would see in an alpha version. More importantly, there are some very fundamental elements of this game, namely the combat, that really need to be fleshed out and added to make this game more interesting and just more fun to play. I will definitely be watching this game as it moves through its development cycle, and you'll probably hear more about this one on my channel here. But if you want to take a look at it yourself, you can download the demo from Steam, or you can give it a follow, and that way you'll get the updates straight yourself. You don't have to wait for me to do it. This is definitely a game that I suggest keeping an eye on. It looks like it might turn out to be something very interesting. If you enjoyed this video, well then leave a like on it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, then take a look at some of my other reviews and videos, and if you like those, then consider subscribing. Thanks for hanging out with me, and until next time, this has been Pixel.